Thank you very much to all our speakers. So, okay, we now move into the Q&A session. If we could have the house lights up a bit. And I guess you're all getting familiar with the format. Wait for the microphone to arrive, speak clearly. And I'm going to try this session to get some questioners from up in the gallery. I apologize to people up there that I sort of promised I'd come to them and we ran out of time last time. But I do want to start just to kick off the discussion by asking a question myself. I guess this is probably to you, Rebecca and Ara. We heard a lot from Francis and Robert and earlier Craig Venter about bioengineering and synthetic biology and some of the wonderful things that are happening. But to what extent should research to tackle global health problems be focusing maybe more upstream on preventative measures rather than cures? Do you think enough is being done? Ara?
Well, I'll start with that. It's a great question. I think, firstly, setting up the context. Sadly, our healthcare systems, if I could just stop talking about the developing world, our developed world healthcare systems are designed as sickness services. They're not designed as a health and a well-being service. And back to how much money we spend, it's a very honorable thing to be spending 19% of your GDP on healthcare in the US or 9% here. But that is not sustainable. And I think everyone realizes that. And that the only way you can make sustainable is actually transforming that health care from a sickness service to a health and well-being service. So back to the developing world, I very much hope they don't repeat our mistakes. And how do we help them in actually designing their own systems which works best for them rather than imposing on them systems that are defunct in the West?
Thank you.
I agree. There's just absolutely not the resources available to deal with the downstream effects of chronic disease. And so I think the focus in the developing world needs to be on prevention. And I think done well, there are lessons that can be taken for the developed world from that. There's real reasons to invest in that.
Thank you. Okay, so let's have some show of hands. Wow. Okay, so we have a gentleman there in the middle with his hand up and a gentleman there. So the first two.
Thank you. My name is Hugh, and I have a question for Mr. Quy Minh Zan. I'm a student from Vietnam, and I know that in Vietnam, China, and in Asian countries, we've been using the Oriental medicine treatment, and in which we use dry herbs or dry roots instead of the Western treatment. So they are very cheap treatment, and I wonder if we can use, and it has gained some success without side effects. So I wonder if we can use engineering knowledge to explain the mysterious behind those treatments. And do you think that we can learn from the nature? And what do you think about the potential future of using those treatments for cancer or any heart treatment disease?
Okay. Well, this is a good question. So some information I'd like to deliver to you. Currently, China launched the two, we call it a mega project. So the mega project means the supporting amount of the money, governmental support is the biggest than ever we have done. And one is drug discovery. Among these drug discovery mega project, and one of the major issues is to try to develop traditional medicine. Since Chinese traditional medicine supported Chinese people survive for 5,000 years. So, but one important issue is to try to use, like you just mentioned, use the modern scientific technology, try to evaluate these. The one is like screen effective, like natural products. So this is one thing, try to get this effective natural product, develop that to the clinical application. Another issue is try to develop like a clinical trial, use we call it scientific and also regular, the fit to the Western medicine clinical trials. Try to make this drug more standard and more acceptable by the whole world community. So this is one issue we are addressing right now in China.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. This is a comment, actually.
So could you have your name and...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my name is Hari Pujar. I'm from Merck in the U.S. This is a comment for Rebecca Richards-Cortum. Thank you for the excellent talk on respiratory pathology and HPV and the work that you've done. I just want to note that we at Merck, engineers at Merck actually, are working on vaccination approaches to extend the reach of pneumococcal and HPV vaccines in the very parts of Africa that you mentioned by way of low-cost manufacturing, development of thermostable vaccines. So I just wanted to make that comment, but thank you for the excellent talk.
Thank you. So, second row here in the middle, and the gentleman right at the back next. The lady in the middle. Sorry, just here.
Hi, my name is Sujata Bhatia, and I teach biomedical engineering at Harvard. And my question is for all of the panelists, do you think that medical doctors and scientists and engineers from the developing world are being appropriately involved in the development of novel medical devices, meaning that one thing that I've been concerned about is that we often will train our students to develop new medical devices and then sort of ship them over to the developing world where, as you're probably well aware, Professor Richards-Cortum, 70% of them sit unused due to lack of infrastructure. So could we be doing more to actually be partnering with scientists and engineers from the developing world to do this?
I guess it's probably still back over to this slide.
I can take a shot at answering that. I think one of the things that we have done very well is to partner with medical schools in the developing world. So NIH has funded a network called MEPI, which is a Medical Education Partnership Initiative. And it's all about improving the infrastructure for research by developing world clinicians in the developing world. It's an excellent model that could be used for engineering, but we're not doing the same thing on the engineering side. It's a big gap.
Thank you. Yes.
Roger Gonzalez, biomedical engineering from University of Texas at El Paso. I've been involved with developing technologies for a developing world for over a decade. And it seems to me that when you develop these technologies, they're pretty limited in their application unless you seem to get a commercial entity to really expand on this because of the distribution system. So I know that, Rebecca, you've been doing some of this stuff, and also the issue related to the previous question, there's issues of hardware and software. You can develop the right hardware, but unless the sufficient training follows that, the effectiveness of the hardware is limited. So it's kind of a two-part question, both the issue of how do you expand the impact of that through commercializing some extent the technology and then being able to provide that training.
It's back to you, I think.
In terms of commercializing these technologies so that they have sustainable impact, one of the most exciting things I have seen happen in the last 3 years is to see much greater interest on the part of large medical device and pharma companies like Merck, but also GE and their rural health division, Becton Dickinson. Many of these large companies are showing much more interest in developing devices and drugs for the developing world. It's largely been motivated by more of the middle-income countries, but not exclusively. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment? No. Good. Okay, so yes.
So Peter Bonfield from Building Research Establishment here in the UK. Very curious about, Rebecca, some of these low-cost ways of delivering care, and then the link to the earlier comment about delivering health and well-being rather than the sickness treatment. And I wonder in the developed world where we stand with respect to, with our mobile phones and other things, having systems that individuals can use to help maintain and improve their health and well-being, so we sort of get better outcomes for our societies in the developed and developing worlds.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think there are so many new mobile health applications that are being developed. But there is a complete lack of research to look at the effectiveness of those mobile health applications. And so I think that's really where the burden from the research perspective needs to be, is what are the ones that are successful? Do they have impact or not?
Just to add to that, we recently published a commission on healthcare technologies in The Lancet, which might be an interesting read. For me it was, being involved in that commission. And I think The trick here is the mindset change, is the technology developed in the UK and the US is going to transform something in Africa. That is not necessarily true. And I think it's taken us a long time to understand that. And in many ways, and I think the GE is a good example, the new mobile ultrasound, which is, 1/10 of the cost of an ultrasound machine, is saving many, many lives in there. It's simple. It tells you whether the baby is breech or not. Another technology developed locally, this e-rangers, which is an ambulance. We know there are certain parts of Africa you can actually have an ambulance because your tires bust up and using it for 48 hours. So coming up with a technology, a mobile system that is allowing you to meet the local needs is, I think, where it needs to go. But mobile telephony, that's fascinating because you probably do know there's more mobile telephones per capita in Africa than there is anywhere in the world.
Can I add some comments? So I'd like to add some comments in this issue. I mean, they too mentioned, African, but still in some area of China. The recent years, and the Chinese government increased the money to expand the coverage. Right now, by the end of this year, I think maybe 97% of countryside people will be covered, but still the amount is still low. At this status, so we need to develop some devices, medical equipment could be used in countryside to serve those farmers. In addition to you develop high quality, could be used in like large and academic hospital, medical centers. But still, this is why I emphasize it several times to form this new model to serve the majority of people. Make that every citizens to enjoy this science, technology.
Thank you. Sorry, a question or up there?
Eric Clavens from the University of Washington. So most engineers, this is sort of an ethical question for engineers. So most engineers that I talk to would say that they don't really care where their funding comes from as long as they work on something fundamental, something that they think maybe could have applications in a lot of different areas. But as we've seen, if you have funding from USAID, you'll probably work on something that has much more likelihood of being applied to an important global development problem. To what extent whereas if you get your funding from NIH, you might be working on immortality, for example. To what extent do we as engineers have to pick and choose our funding, and to what extent can we influence how the funding in our countries is directed?
Francis and Robert, I'm going to come to you. So, I don't. Wow, unfair.
Well, I'd like to think that I think there's different things. I'd like to think that fundamental engineering research can be used globally. Again, I think if you look at what both Francis and I talked about, clearly there's, applications in the United States, but I'll just pick a little bit of what we're doing, and I'm sure Francis can do the same. But, so we've done a lot of work on what I call controlled release systems that can deliver drugs for long times and control the patterns and so forth. And actually, I should say, when we first proposed that, we couldn't get any money for it from the NIH. People didn't feel you could do some of those things. But over time, we did get funding. And I would say then, in the last 15 or 20 years, we also got some funding from the World Health Organization and from the Gates Foundation to apply those very principles to better vaccine delivery for polio vaccine and all kinds of things that might be helpful in the third world. And so I think when you do fundamental engineering research, and I think Frances can say the same thing in her area, I think you create principles that can be applied across the board. I think some of the challenges came up in the questions, and some of the things that Rebecca talked about is, even if you create them, then how do you distribute them? How do you get companies to make them? But I think from the science standpoint, I feel like the kinds of things we're doing can be useful for the third world. And really the challenge is to get any funding agency to want to fund really long-range basic engineering or scientific research, in my opinion, because there's just always a high level of skepticism if anybody's doing anything new. Anyhow, I'll turn it over to you.
I just want to reiterate what Craig Venter said this morning, that the solutions eventually come from science. Science is 100% of the solution. How you implement the science is the next step. And that's to me, even more complicated than the science. I find science easy. The implementation is extremely difficult, and that's where the difficult solutions have to be found. But we have to have the science in the first place.
Question over there, yes.
Hi, that's very loud. Rhys Phillips from EADS. Talking to people who've been involved in tissue engineering in the past, I'm aware that there's obviously a lot of backlash, and in some cases people who are against the idea can actually be quite threatening to those who are engaging in research in it. And similarly to doing work in the non-developing world, I think there are some parts of the world who don't understand what you're doing, and certainly in the area I work, there are people who think that that topic is witchcraft. So how do you get around these sorts of moral issues and the educational issues?
So I guess that might be more directed at me. Yeah. But I guess to me, any area of science, there can be some good things and some bad things. I guess the way I think about it is I think the people that do what we do, we're in it for the cures and the treatments that it can give, and that it can prolong life and relieve suffering. I think certainly anything that can do something good, there's the potential to do something bad. But to me, in all these areas, I just think that the number of people you're helping just far outweigh, the kinds of negative considerations, at least in my mind.
Yes.
Krishna from Arizona State University. I hope I'm correct in understanding that the cost of vaccination, almost 80-90% of it comes from the needle to deliver the chemical rather than all the development that goes behind that. Has there been a lot of research done on cost-effective delivery systems that can be used in these worlds where the resources are limited?
Who would like to address that?
There are. Needles are not the only way to deliver a vaccine. There are many, many other ways of delivering vaccines. Needleless injections, patches, polio classic. You take it as a tablet, or not a tablet, but of sweet, so a few drops on a sweet. So there are numerous ways, and I think the delivery mechanism is getting better and better with better engineering. We have one famous engineer here who's developed one needless injection system, which is really has gathered a huge amount of pace.
Thank you. Question there? No. Okay. Gentleman there then.
Jyoti Mazumdar from University of Michigan. My question is more of a philosophical. While I was listening to this afternoon, Professor Darzi was talking about sending surgeon for 6 weeks of engineering course. We have these boundaries for electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, medicine. Can we think of a totally new way of educating people, and instead of saying that I'm studying mechanical engineering, we look at a problem like cancer engineering, and we teach them everything needed around that, instead of putting basically in chimneys we built hundreds of years back.
No one has any. Everyone's sitting back. Well, thank you.
I'll try. And I'm certainly no expert on this, but I guess to me, if you want to learn about cancer, I still think you want to learn the fundamentals first. I still think it's important to learn biology, and if you're going to learn engineering, to learn the fundamentals of that first. I think that, what we've tried to do at MIT, just as one example, is, I think people come and they learn biology, they get a PhD in biology, or they get a PhD in engineering. What we've done recently is create a building, though, which is half, biologists and half engineers. Angie actually is in that building, too, and with the idea that you could have engineers interact with biologists in fundamental ways to do research. But and that's all aimed at better cancer research. But I still think that learning the fundamentals, to me, you have to do that first. That would just be my personal opinion. I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees, but
I think they all agree, Robert.
Okay, good.
We have about 2 minutes left. There's one question up there, and then I have another question coming from the Birmingham audience. Hello.
Hi, Amber Hall, bioengineering student from the University of Toledo. It's obvious that healthcare costs, at least in the developed world, are just increasing astronomically. What's to say that we, especially as aspiring engineers who will be graduating soon, couldn't take these simpler technologies that we're trying to infiltrate and distribute amongst the developing countries and bring them to our developed countries first, or parallel, to get those distributing ideas done and kind of installed so we can also lower our healthcare costs as well as provide innovation to developing countries.
Rebecca, do you want to say?
I think there's a tremendous opportunity for leapfrogging technology. So I'll give you the example of surgical pathology. So there's some very exciting microscopy technology that's been developed that could be used to do real-time surgical pathology. And there's a lot of barriers to introducing that in the developed world because we already have ways of solving that problem. In the developing world, they don't. They're very excited in this technology. So I think if it proves useful there, there's an opportunity then to bring it back to the developed world and be able to reduce cost in that way. So I think that leapfrogging is a real incentive.
Our final question then comes from the Birmingham audience. And again, I don't know who's best to address this. How do you balance the development of products and services for health with intellectual property against making these discoveries more widely available? So sort of an ethical issue. Do you want? Yeah. I've stumped everyone with that one, haven't I? Poor Birmingham. They asked a question about Mars, and everyone laughed, and now they asked a really sensible question. Francis, you look like you're about to say something profound.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with making a profit, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with making a profit in providing goods and services to people who need them. What we need is further assistance, though, to disseminate the technologies where profit is less certain.
Thank you very much. I think we will draw this session to a close. I'll give the panelists a chance to get back to their seats before we segue smoothly on immediately to the next section. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking all 5 speakers again.